Thank you for the great intro, and hello and good morning to everybody. I believe Wayne is in the process of logging in right now, but I'd love to start off the conversation because this is a very important topic to many engineers as well as product managers who are listening out there about how to continue building your influence. So who better to talk about it than two industry leaders, and super happy to have Sabrina Farmer from Google with us today. So Sabrina, why don't you give us a brief introduction about yourself and your career path so far?
Great. Sabrina Farmer. I run an organization called Site Reliability Engineering at Google, and I work across many of Google's largest products, which include all of G Suite, Search, Android, Play, Chrome, and I run the infrastructure components as well. So Google's authentication systems, their abuse systems, the data indexing, all of the data storage for serving results, et cetera. So that's what I do. I've been in Google for about 15 years now. I think it's important when we talk about influence to understand where my role fits. So I don't report into any of these products. I work alongside them as a partner. And so influence plays a big role because when I want to get all these engineering teams focused on something specific that's affecting our users, right, I have to go in with credibility of what I'm asking for and influence these teams who don't report to me to get this work done.
Absolutely, Sabrina. In fact, that actually is a great segue to some of the actually the first question of the panel, which is how do you think about influence, right? And you mentioned sometimes that comes from reporting chain or the ability to get things done. But if you could define that for our audience here, and then also how do you measure influence from one person to another?
I think that it's important to realize what influence is, right? It's about getting your ideas on the table, also having a seat at the table, and getting people on board. So you can push your ideas and make progress for sure and get results, but it's so much easier and more efficient when you can bring people along. And I think especially when you're working on something that's new and innovative and it's different and people don't really understand what you're trying to get out of it, like having the skills to bring people on that journey and building that trust that you need for them to be like, I will give you my time. I will put my time into your idea. And so I think trust is a critical component of that. I think that you can measure someone's influence by watching how many people listen, right? Like being able to observe that and look around you and like who gets on board, who talks about, whose work are they talking about? Because that's a signal like, hey, that person is influential and I should partner with them, right? That's a really good way to build your influence, right? Is to partner with people who are more influential as you, because if they can share their credibility onto you, right, that means when you go into the room by yourself, like they already trust that this other person that they trust is there. And so they just start with that as a foundation, and it's a real strength.
Absolutely. And I'd love for, as we continue with the panel, Sabrina, for you to share some, personal anecdotes for how you were able to, in the growth of your career, also from one angle, get the support of folks who are more influential, right? And then in your current position as a vice president of site reliability engineering for Google, how do you then also, leverage your influence to sponsor or to enable others? So, have you, speaking of influence, and especially for the audience today, are there some commonalities that you've seen in individuals who are able to build their influence much faster, right? Are there things that they do, such as, coming to work early and staying late or helping out their team members? Tell us a little bit about that from your perspective as a leader.
I think that's an interesting example of what they might do, because I think people with real influence, they're not working more hours, right? In fact, they sometimes get to work less hours, right? Because they're not trying to do everything themselves. So, it's definitely not, hey, work more, and that's what's going to gain you influence. I think for some of the people that I work with and some of the most influential people at Google, they tend to be very humble. They're good listeners, and I think that's the major component. And I think it goes back to what I said about trust. Like, who are you going to trust, and how are you going to build that trust? Certainly, being in the management chain and being in a really strong position or power position, that gives you some influence, but not actually what will make you the most influential, right? And I think that trust and being able to build that trust is the most important component.
Absolutely. So platforming off of the very important trust theme that Sabrina brought up, and we have now Wayne. So Wayne, why don't you introduce yourself to the audience, and then we'd love to hear from your perspective as well, right? How does one build influence with trust in mind?
Well, thank you for the introduction, Nancy, and hello everyone. Sorry for being late. We had some technical difficulties, but we persevered. So thank you everybody in the background that made this work. My name is Wayne Dusso, and I'm the Vice President at AWS, responsible for delivering a whole series of infrastructure services that many of you may even build on. So thank you. So Nancy, maybe you could repeat the question one more time for me.
Sure. So we were just going through, how does one define influence, and how does one sort of measure relative influence, and what are some of the best practices to continue building influence? And so Sabrina brought up a good point around the theme of focusing on building trust as something to index on as one builds influence. And so from your vantage point, as a vice president at AWS, how do you see, that journey, and then also what role does trust and building trust play into the journey of building one's influence?
Yeah, it's a very iterative process, and I'm sure you touched upon that already in the answer. Making sure that you're part of the dialogue. We talked about this in some previous sessions around having room at the table, making sure you're in a role where there is a table for you, and you're able to get to that table, be a good listener, understand your role within, around that table, and then within your role, understand how to bring value, how to add value to the dialogue. At the end of the day, influence is more of is an output. You're going to receive, or you're going to be able to have that influence if you are at the table and you are bringing value to the conversation. And sometimes bringing value to the conversation is being a great listener, and that's a good start. And from there, trust will build. So I absolutely agree. Trust is something that's built up over time, and it's very iterative with influence.
Absolutely. And so for Sabrina and Wayne, given that you've both shared your perspectives on the journey of building influence, as well as the importance of building trust within that journey, some individual contributors might think, I'm an IC, right? And I'm not the leader, and therefore I don't need to cultivate influence. So what are some ways to maybe gently remind those people that regardless if you're an IC, people manager, where you are in your career, that influence is a critical piece of building out your life journey?
I remember when I was an IC, and the only thing I had to care about was my own work. What did I do? Like, how did I complete my project? Like, the days. Now I'm responsible for 750 people, right? And my job is about making sure they have opportunities, making sure they're able to execute, that we have interesting work to do, and we're not wasting a bunch of time or other people's time. And so I will point out to this IC, like, yes, you're not having to do it because someone else is doing it for you. And I think what I realized early on in my career was I actually wanted to be the one who decided what I worked on, right? I wanted to be in control of what I was doing and how I was doing it, because I was going to approach the problem a little bit differently. And so it was critical for me to figure out, like, how did I make sure I was in the driver's seat of my career, of my work, of my team's work? And the more I was able to do that for myself, I started to be able to do that for other people, which put me in a tech lead role, right? And then being a really effective tech lead was, one of my favorite parts or moments in my career. And then that led to management. You don't need to choose management in order to develop these skills and leverage these skills. So I would tell that person, like, think a little bit further ahead about what it is you want to do.
Absolutely. And Wayne, what are your thoughts on, how you influence, or how do you sort of coach, right, folks within your organization, like Sabrina does for hers, in thinking about building their influence early on?
Yeah, I often think of influence in terms of leadership. And whether you're an IC or a very senior person within your organization, there's always opportunity to lead. If you're an entry-level engineer, first job out of school, you may not think that you're a leader, but you are. Within, as was mentioned, within your own personal task, within your own space, you're your own leader. And as you progress through, and you're no longer the new college hire, maybe you're the second year in, you have the opportunity to help lead those that are coming behind you, and maybe even some of your peers that came in with you that you may be doing something different than they are. And that leadership, that personal leadership as an individual contributor, converts into influence, because it's through your leadership that you are in fact influencing people. And so leading doesn't necessarily mean follow me and have everybody sort of march behind you. Leadership has different styles. You can lead from the front, the side, the back. It's very contextual, but that definitely leads to influence over time. And people such as your managers and your leaders will take note, and your influence will build with them as well.
So those are definitely great points. And as we shared, how to coach others along the path of influence is also, what are some influence do nots, right? Or practices that you don't
do not. Okay, I will share one of my biggest pet peeves, honestly. And it happened very recently. So I think project managers are in a very difficult position, right? Like, they have to get people to do work, and they don't necessarily have authority over that person. So recently someone went to my teams and said, hey, I need you to do all this work. And Sabrina said, right? Sabrina approved this. She needs it. It's for Sabrina. And my team scrambled and they did it. And then I found out because they didn't do what I actually needed them to do. And I was like, who did this? Why did you do it? And it turns out that, like, I actually did not approve this work, right? I didn't agree for the teams to do it. I did know about this person, what this person was doing, but not the scope of it nor the effect on my team. And so all these people did this work, and it actually wasn't what they wanted. And this project manager was just trying to move his project forward, but he did it in such a way that, like, he made a bunch of people do work that they didn't need to do. And so next time he comes to my team, he's in a less powerful position to get them to do work rather than more, right? Because he had that messed up. So I do think, like, when you're going to try to influence people by leveraging someone else's power, like, make sure you have that before, because it can really work against you. Wayne, I don't know if you have another example of that.
I actually love your example, because you and I have chatted about this before on conflating influence with power. And influence is what you see. Influence.
Yeah.
But more put and not necessarily terribly important. I would maybe add what you said by saying, understand your role within any conversation, within any, exert the influence, and it's based on what your role is. So there's an old framework.
Hey, Wayne, your internet is.
Outcome, are you accountable?
Wait,
outcome?
can you hear me?
Are you a consultant to the outcome? Supportive, doing the first letters that stand for RASCI. And within any situation, understand what your role is, and then apply, great listening skills and great influencing skills based on why you're there and what the context is. Because sometimes people assert an influence when they're really there just to support, the main owners of a decision. And in doing so, they actually rob themselves of influence. They rob themselves of this, knockoff effect, which is power. And to the earlier point, they in some way erode trust, right? Because they don't show the greatest judgment. So those are I would be careful in understanding why you're there, and then apply influence based on your role.
Yeah. And I also tell my team that, right? I said, if someone comes to you and says, Sabrina said, and it's a bunch of work, like, I will never send someone to tell you that I want you to do a bunch of work, right? Yeah. I'm going to do it. And so I'm like, if someone says that, you don't have to do the work unless you hear it from me.
That's a super important point, because that's used a lot, right? It's a false sense of influence and power when somebody comes in and says, my manager, or worse off, the CEO says, and you'd be like, you hand them the phone, you say, call the CEO, we'll talk to him right now.
Exactly.
Yeah, and so for those in the audience, those are definitely things to avoid, and especially if anyone on Sabrina's team, now you know what's not. So last question before we open up to the audience for any Q&A is, let's say you're going to Wayne or Sabrina or your engineering leader, and you say, hey, I want to get promoted, right? And I have about an hour a day to work on what I need to do, right? In addition to, of course, your day-to-day responsibilities in order to get me there. So Wayne and Sabrina, what would you guys say are the top thing that you would recommend for that person to do?
Go ahead, Sabrina.
The first thing I tell people to do, and I do this, is read your job ladder and read your level, right? The most important thing is understand the full spectrum, because almost all ladders are spectrums, right? So you want to understand the full spectrum of your current level. When you feel like I have a really good understanding of that, then read the next level, right? Make sure you kind of understand the spectrum of that somewhat, right? Because when you get promoted to the next level, it's not you're 100% there. You're just well into that ring of that. So I think then the next thing you do is do a diff. Do a diff between the ladders. Make a list of like, what are the differences between this level and that level? That list, pull out the skills required. Look at your work, compare it to the diff, and like, what's missing, right? What am I not doing? How do I up level how I'm working? And it's like, once you have that list, then spend an hour a day, like, how do I build this skills? How do I up level this project from senior to principal or staff or whatever the next level of what it is that you're aiming for? Yep, that's my advice.
That's really good advice, and definitely welcome everyone to take that before they have conversations with their leadership on next steps. What about you, Wayne?
Adding to what Sabrina said, if I had 1 hour a week and I wanted to understand how to move my career forward, in addition to what Sabrina said around understanding what it means from a company and a culture standpoint to get to the next level, I would spend time talking with leaders. I would spend time talking with people at the next level. I would spend time with the folks that probably have input to my promotion to understand specifically how they see me in my role today and what they would like to see me continue and double down on, what they would like to see me add to my repertoire of capabilities. And we all have things we shouldn't be doing. And we're not always the best judge of what those are because we can't see them. Because often if we did, we'd stop.
Yeah.
And you're never going to know what those are until you go ask people. If you would, you need to use others as a mirror.
Yeah.
So I would spend, this sounds a bit vain, but I'd spend an hour in the mirror. And I would just try to understand who I was and apply those lessons. I think that's a reasonable way of spending an hour a week.
And with that said, I'd love to turn to the audience. In fact, actually, first, great comment from Benjamin here, based on the dialogue that we had. Is, are you telling me that there are places where they enumerate levels? And so the answer is yes. Definitely, check out those job descriptions and make sure you understand kind of what is expected of you today, and then moving on to the next level. So that was more of a quip than a question. Let's see. So the first question, and feel free to jump in here, Plato team as well, is how do you balance the idea of, unless it's me telling you to do work, don't do it, right, to Sabrina's point, with empowering engineers to see or hear something and fixing issues that do serve the team or the company?
I think that, what I tell my team, I'm like, what are the problems, right? Like, what problems are happening around us? All of those are opportunities. The other thing is like, what's changing, right? Like, if you can pay attention to what's changing, right? Some people don't like change. I love it. And the reason I love it is because that's really where you find all the opportunities. So I think that, when I tell people, like, don't do work that someone asked you to because they said I said it. That's what I meant, right? To do it. I think that I want my teams, I'm like, you're here to solve problems. I hired you because you're smart, right? And we're here serving Google's users, right? So what do you think is most important? The next thing is making sure they know what's important, right? Like, what is the company thinking about? What is the company's goals, right? Or, not just the company, because Google's really big, but what is happening in our domains, right? Like, what's going on in Gmail right now? Like, what is the business saying? What is the observations of the users, right? Where does the leadership want to take it next, right? And so with that information, they have the information to make priority decisions and choose what is the most important thing to do next.
Thanks, Sabrina. And Wayne, would you like to opine on that question as well? So this goes back into, dialogues that you and I have had around the sort of pull everything to you as a leader or push down different frameworks that you would like the team to execute. So tell us about kind of the trade-off between those two models, and then how do you then influence others to do work without asking them directly to?
Yeah, so if communication from leadership, whether leadership is the person who runs the entire business, or product managers within the business, or engineering leaders within the business, communication as to the purpose of your work, the purpose of why we're showing up every day, the objectives that you have for a given year or a given quarter that help fulfill that purpose, making sure that everyone's aligned on what that is and how that relates back to the customer or the user community that you serve. And then allowing every individual to have input on what they believe, what they see, what the data tells them is important. That becomes a way of making sure that any work that's done is valuable work. And then it's up to leaders to shape how that work gets done, how it's prioritized. Because it's often, that some great ideas come from every corner of the organization, and what leaders need to do is make sure that those are prioritized in the right way, and then communicate why the priority is the way it is for a given context, given community, or so on. So, to Sabrina's point, we hire amazing humans. Like, they're amazing. They don't need a lot of being told what to do. Often they tell us what to do. And our job is to coordinate that so that, that 100 voices or that 50 voices, or in Sabrina's case, that's 750 voices, right? All get coordinated in a way which produces the best result. So if I have people coming up to me and saying they're doing work because somebody told them to, it's such a deeper conversation.
Absolutely. And so, next question, kind of bouncing off of that is, as a senior leader, and this goes back to, now that you're, in positions of your career with, at least leading several hundred people, is how do you influence or gain respect of engineers who are outside your immediate area of expertise?
Wayne, do you want to start?
Sure. So that's a really good question. And the notion of outside your area of expertise is a very subjective phrase. So often, and I've been an engineer my entire life, so often we equate area of expertise to technology. You've worked on technology X, Y, or Z, produced product, M or N. And as you progress forward, your area of expertise is less to do with the technology that you're, very good, you're a subject matter expert at. It has more to do with problem solving. And if you're a great problem solver, and most engineers, most, business people too are great problem solvers, that becomes your area of expertise. So if you can ground yourself in the problem set that another person, another group is solving, and you can ask the right questions, not about technology, but about what the problem is and why is that a problem and what are the possibilities, you automatically start influencing that dialogue by asking great questions, because people will answer great questions.
Yeah, I think asking questions to sort of show that you're helpful and gonna do something for people is a key thing. The other thing to think about, and I 100% hate this word, is what is your brand and what are you known for, and how can you leverage that and leverage your allies to use that to your benefit. And the key to that is like, what do people say about you? That's your brand, right? And get in front of that. Like, what do you want people to know about you? Start cultivating that. And when you go to outside teams, like bring that forward for them. So that they can leverage that, and then they're like, who's this Sabrina person? And they're gonna be like, oh my God, she works on search. She works on, those are the things that will help you walk into the room, have people start by listening, and then, do your thing.
Absolutely. And so, definitely take note on, especially those in our audience who are looking for maybe career advice, right? And they're asking, forgiveness over asking permission. Do you have any advice on balancing, getting buy-in and also bring people along with you, taking initiative and also bold steps?
I think the key to that is like, what are the risks? Just going knowing what the risks are is the most important thing. Like, okay, I do this and it lands well. What's the worst thing that's going to happen, right? And then if you look at the worst thing and be like, can I mitigate that, right? Or do I have air cover for that? And then just cover your bases and then just do it, right? And let it land and then, see how it goes. When it goes poorly, you already have a mitigation plan if you start with that. So that's my best advice.
And how about you, Wayne?
Well, for those of you who know me and have worked with me, you know that asking for forgiveness is my preferred method. Asking for permission is a little boring. But what does that really mean? It really means that you go off and you find real problems that need to be solved. When you go off and you actually start solving problems, and often you'll solve, depending on where you are in your career, you'll solve problems at scope, and you will, come to your leaders, your peers, and you'll present, a solution. And the reason why you pursued that problem is because the data told you that it was a real problem. I'm going to say somewhere high 90% of the time, people are going to embrace you, and they're going to thank you. And the worst thing that could happen, maybe, you should have done, X before Y, but both X and Y were important. So, next time take this input as an ordering parameter, but you'll generally do really well. Solve real problems. And by real problems, I mean problems that your business, your customers, and your user community have.
Yeah, exactly.
You're unlikely to get in trouble.
Yeah, exactly. Like if you're choosing X and Y and you can explain why you made that choice, you'll be fine asking for permission, right? But if you did Y and that was maybe somebody else's decision to make, right? That's really the moment where you're like, worst thing that could happen, okay, it's not my work. That's when you need to bring people in with you, right? Just bring them along and say, hey, I want to try this, I want to do it. So that's sort of the moment of, do I ask for permission? Do I bring people with me? Or can I just do this? And yep, there you go.
And Plato HQ team, Gopi, do we have time for one last question? All right, I assume I can. So using the ask for forgiveness model.
There you
All
go.
right. So in the public, Q&A, I do see, some questions around, how do you, or what do people say about you, maybe to end off our conversation today, and what is your brand? So maybe Sabrina and then Wayne, if you guys could go do that question.
Yeah, that's a toughie.
What is my brand? I would say early on in my career, my brand was really execution. Right? Like, Sabrina can get stuff done. You want it done, give it to Sabrina, right? Like, that was really what people said about me and why I was put on certain projects. And I think overall, like, what I wanted people to say was like, she's a strategic thinker. She sees the big picture, because that's how I defined myself, right? And so I had to take time to sort of be like, what do I need to show that's what my brand is? And so I think now, what is my brand? I think I'm still the get it done person, right? But I think people are like, she sees the long term, she sees the big picture, she can bring people together, she communicates well, and has a good following. So, that makes it effective for me to partner with my stakeholders. So,
Thank you, Sabrina. And to wrap us up, Wayne, how about you?
Nancy, I hate this question. Tenacious, passionate, fair. That simple.
And I think to Wayne's earlier point, sometimes you have to sort of realize, what, I guess, profile you are by looking in the mirror and being authentic to you. And that's actually one of the really big dialogues. I think we can have probably a whole summit just on how to be an authentic leader. And so today we're super grateful to be joined by Sabrina Farmer, Vice President at Google, as well as Wayne Dussault, Vice President at AWS, around this conversation. And so I'm super excited to say that they're both part of the Advancing Women in Product Ambassador community, because they want to, help advance the next generation of women and minority leaders in engineering as well as technical product roles. So if you're interested in checking them out, we'll be sharing their LinkedIn bios afterwards with the audience, and they'll be around for follow-on questions.
Thank you, Nancy. Thank you, Sabrina.
Thanks, Wayne. Thanks, Nancy.